It's quite early. Not that early, actually. Oh, honey. I've just gone live. But you know what? I don't need to do this now. I don't need to do this now. I'll talk to you later. My good wife has just got up. So I must talk on these topics. And just share some thoughts and some love.
Evolution of thoughts.
Evolution of thoughts. I like that. Evolution of thoughts. And I titled it Did We Build the Pyramids? No, How We Built the Pyramids. And did we ask for this? Did we seek this? This is our own doings, our own seeking to help us grow. Help us have.
It always comes back to
It always comes back to you, to me or you.
always go back to the self.
You know, I've been thinking a little bit about that thing I did for the Guardian newspaper that Roxanne organized. And, you know, in that they chose to use just a few lines of all the minutes that they recorded of me, just a few snippets. And one of those snippets, I think it starts, I've only watched it one time, but I think it starts like with me shouting something like that your government wants you divided. And, you know, I've thought that phrase is, I mean, I don't, you know, it was just, you've heard me say this before, it was a totally spontaneous experience, occurrence, and the words that came out of my mouth were not chosen by me specifically. I just had to start by saying something, and I think I started by saying that the government wants you divided. And I was meaning it like as a human race, a race of humans, people, that the government wants you divided from one another through the various memes of religion, race, greed. And I think now more that it means the system wants you divided from yourself. It's the division of self that causes the harm that we see manifested in various guises here on the plane. But it's that division of self. So if we're here to remember, we're here to pull the body or the soul and the mind back together as one, in harmony with our creator or the creator or this creation which is us.
The Illuminati eliminates the way.
We're kind of, Andrea and I are talking in ways that would make us sound seditious to the typical truther mindset that we've come from.
But
you
the
know,
truth is
because
be free.
yes, the idea that, you know, Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati and the Freemasonry and so on are the spawn of Satan may not be true. It may simply be the cattle prod that is designed to create the experiences, the hardships, the various painful aspects of this human experience. They may be designed, they may be intentionally designed to give us the the Disneyland experience, you know, to give us the House of Horrors experience, so that we are enabled to find those cardinal virtues, the four cardinal virtues: courage and temperance and wisdom. I think, was wisdom one of them?
Yeah.
You know, to find the cardinal virtues. And by cardinal, I don't mean religious. I mean the four key points: north, south, east, west. Those virtues are what we're here to strive for, I think, to return to that love and all of that. But it needs to be, you know, it needs to be a deep love, which is not based in the material, but more an ethereal, spiritual love, based in the wisdom gained from, you know, the experiences, the hurt and the hardship of this place. So that's just like a headline on that, and it's something to flesh out more in conversation later on.
We're on the yellow brick road, I mean.
We're on the yellow brick road, to use the analogy of Dorothy and the Wizard of Australia. We know that the yellow brick road, along the way, there are vendors selling all sorts of, you know, shiny goods, frightening goods. And I think as a father, as a parent, I know that my children need to, and I do have done, need to experience those vendors, vendacious vendings, because it is in experiencing those and hopefully coming through them, you know, moving along, we find our way to the key to unlock the Emerald City and, you know, get to that heart thing. And of course, we know many people, we know ourselves, who have spent many hours, many years in certain shops, perusing the goods, becoming experts on the goods, sometimes deciding to stay there and become a vendor of those goods ourselves. And I've certainly done that too, you know, with the flat earth and, you know, 9/11 and other fear porn stuff. But you know, the idea is to you know, I mean, if you need to stay there for a few lifetimes, I think perhaps that's what happens. You know, maybe that's what happens. And maybe if you're still listening to this, you're one of those people who's also been through that and done the vending and got to be the expert of a particular shop, a particular product or products. And you realize that there's got to be more than simply that. And I've had a few experiences lately meeting some lovely people where I see the contrast between people who are expert at their particular product and are lost in the basement sometimes of that outlet, or perhaps even in the upper floors or the penthouse aspect of that. But they are still very focused on that, and I think
And separate from self.
Separate from self. And I think there's others who have kind of dipped their toe in that water, seen that product, tasted the product, perhaps enjoyed the product, or not, but decided to keep moving along the yellow brick road. And I make no judgment as to which is right or wrong. It just seems to me that I'm encouraging myself, and therefore you, to consider always looking in the mirror and reviewing whether or not you're stuck in a particular product and not doing the work on the yellow brick road towards the unlocking of this awesome puzzle. But it does seem to me now that it's a puzzle. Part of the puzzle, part of the sort of layout of this game has us so frightened of death, so that when we send young men off to war, or we cause people to die prematurely by various toxic means, that's seen in the human sphere as a terrible, terrible thing. But perhaps we will discover one day that this was, at one time in our, once we remember everything, that this was part of our promise to ourselves, was to have a Disneyland reality. I don't mean this to diminish this reality, because this, as I said to Nick Phuket Word in a comment the other day, nice to have him doing all this live stream stuff, but it was nice. I commented that, this human experience is absolutely real, but infinitesimally small part of everything. So we become so fixated on the totality of this and the totality of a death, rather than seeing it as, almost, a type of a virtual reality sort of gameplay scenario for us to come and practice and to grow and so on. And so, as in a computer game, when the character dies and comes back again, it's just, it's like, oh, I've gone, but I'll be back. I'll just refresh and add a new life, and here I am, and I'm back again, and I carry on. So once you get over that fear and that anger of the system doing those things to us, then perhaps we start to be able to enjoy this a whole lot more, given the knowledge we have, given the shops we've visited, and given the insight that, we are magnificent beyond imagining, but we're in here in this toe-stubbingly painful reality, with a prospect of eventually getting to the end of something. And in that vein, I sometimes wonder whether then the role of the deceivers, as we see them, is actually to maintain the integrity of the Disneyland environment, and therefore the kind of simple mindset that the majority of us come with, which is that this is a material world and we're here and we're gone. Because if we didn't have that fear, if we knew that the magician's trick, then no one would come, or no one would learn anything from this, and then there would perhaps be the call to reset and say, well, we need to start the game again. We need to turn the board upside down, or invert the board, as my pal Lee from the Flat Earth British team keeps talking about, how this game board might get flipped, which is why we get these sort of raised floor levels. maybe that's why they do it. Maybe that's when it has to happen. Is that when enough people have worked out that there's nothing to fear here, um, then if you're not put through the hard work, if you don't have to run the hard yards here, then your heart will not be forced to address the 7 deadly sins.
Which is what the system offers you.
The system is all about the 7 deadly sins. I had an old pal, Peter, who came to visit me the other day. He, my longest standing school friend, and probably my best friend before I found out about Flat Earth. And he's been in London 6 months, and it was the first time we'd met up, so that gives you an indication of the nature of things. But he's a devout Catholic dude, and we've argued over the years quite strongly about Catholicism and the problems of Catholicism, but I was always coming at it from an atheistic point of view. And so, but he's, very devout. In fact, he boasts how, like in 30 years, he's missed about 2 Sunday masses, he just that kind of he loves his church and will forgive pretty much whatever they do. So I asked him about the 7 heavenly virtues, and he was like, what? Because as I mentioned the other day, Andrea and I, in conversation, kind of realized that we didn't know the opposite of the 7 deadly sins. We weren't explicit. We weren't clear on what they were, so we went and researched them. And gosh, aren't they powerful? And that is what I think that we're meant to be striving towards, is those virtuous things in a world in which the sins are on offer. So maybe if it gets to a point when enough people have worked it out, then they go, okay, well, we got to start again. Because it seems to me that the way that when you look around, people are this human experience is in some ways lazy, and in some ways willing to kind of sit back on the sofa and let it happen. I think about that for myself, when the National Lottery started in England in 94, 95, I fantasized about what I would do with the winnings. And then over the years, as the years went by, I was like, okay, if I'd won this money 5 or 10 years ago, would I have done the growing that I've done? And the answer is no. I don't think so. Would it have caused hardships and difficulties? Yes, but perhaps that slothful kind of comfort that comes from having everything given to you on a plate is actually a disability. So
I think that you offered opportunities. You call them lessons.
I'll put the camera on you.
Morning. I think you offered opportunity lessons in all walks of life. So I think everybody has those chances to experience things and then choose to look at yourself. I saw a little thing yesterday which was a good message for me, because I'm having to face my things and look at myself and hopefully evolve. And it was, accountability is like an attack when you're not to look at your toxic behavior.
Ooh, well said.
And it's basically, it is this, going inward and stop blaming the outward things. Although the outward experience will give you the prod, it'll give you the ache, it'll give you the pain, it'll give you the nudge, whatever you want to call it, to look at it. But we can instead turn outward and blame the system that we're not behaving that way because of that, rather than accepting in love, unconditional love of yourself, that um, you are not good at that, or you have that to learn, or you have that to kind of heal.
Mm. Mm.
And it's that being humble, which is one of the virtues. Being humble enough to say, well, I'm not that good at that, or I need to improve on that, or I've got a way to go with that, and that acceptance of self gives you the opportunity to then take accountability of that toxic behavior. And we all have toxic behavior, and I think that's what we're meant to be working on. So it is a journey inward, and it's a journey of and hopefully from that you find that joy, that bliss that we're supposed to experience here.
Awesome.
But it is about detaching. It's about detaching from the external, from the system.
Well, detaching in a way, but also like
emotionally detaching. I'm talking. I'm not emotionally detaching.
I was reading some of the comments while Andrea was speaking, and good morning to Ricardo and Gracie, Mark, Tommy. If I've missed anyone else there. Yeah, detaching. I mean, detaching from the fear, but actually, we've got to go through this in order to kind of learn that courage. Like the Tin Lion or whatever from Tin Man from the
lion, courage.
The lion learns the courage.
The straw man.
You're not gonna. You're not.
Man.
You're not. The straw man.
Like
The straw man. Yeah. The scarecrow is the straw man. You're not going to grow by staying in your basement of your subject matter. You're not going to grow until you go out. I'm not going to grow until I go out and take those steps of courage. So this is important. I think that we shouldn't hide behind one another, or the wife hides behind the husband, or vice versa. Ultimately the child eventually has to stand out in front of from the parents and deal with the world themselves. This is the direction that my thinking is taking me, and it's like, don't you see that in the flat earth community, at least, in fact all of the little controlled shops, there's this sort of demand that there should be accountability and change or some kind of conflict brought to the established order, when it may well be that the established order is designed to provide you with the necessary life tests and experiences that we need. Because again, if 1,000 people or 10,000 people or 100,000 people were together and to get the kind of, let's just say, the banks to pay everybody $1 million, $1 million or whatever, or more, just simply to say, look, you're entitled to this as part of your sort of birthright. In this world, at this time, that would be a recipe for disaster, because people have not done that work themselves. That's a kind of bitter pill for me to swallow in a way, because I've struggled quite a bit, financially over the years when I have family members who might have been able to to help me out. But I had to kind of help myself, or I have to help myself. And that's just an example of,
You've got to be the change.
as I've said before, the Saudi oil sheikhs' children will struggle when everything is handed to them on a golden platter and everybody bows and scrapes for them. I'm not saying they can't learn the life lessons and become the four virtues, the cardinal virtues, and embody that. And perhaps they can. I don't want to prejudge, but it's one of those big pools that you can kind of get lost in, you can drown in. So that's that. Hey, Mark of Melbourne, that video you did, it was blocked from, making comments, and I think it's right to say that this is where the problem is, and people need to see that for sure. And I think calling out Zionism or whatever it is, it is important, but it's like, I don't feel like in the early days when I was looking at this, I did feel like real anger towards that status quo, and I see it, and I think people need to see it, but I don't think I need to feel. I'm not suggesting you are. I don't think I need to feel angry about it. I think what some people would like to do is to stoke that sense of, these are the bad guys, this group here or that group there, and we need to beat them down. Again, I think that we will change the paradigm when we change who we are, what we are. That really may take a long time in human experience, and that's maybe why we've been going through these iterations on this plane. It may take an awful long time, to kind of get to the other part of the title of this vlog. It's about the pyramids, how we built them. If you think about how in the biblical sense we are fallen from up high or something higher, and then in my DMT experience, I was left in no doubt that I am an extremely powerful entity, magnificent and powerful entity above anything of the human spectrum. So that was that's something to put on the table as part of this conversation. Then the other day, Josh and Charlotte popped around, and they were talking about their DMT experience, and Charlotte had a similar thing to me, which, my memory being what it is, I'd forgotten about not forgotten, but it had become less significant in my mind somehow, that she'd had a like a very Egyptian experience, very Egyptian, and that was like, whoa. So I did too, and it was so powerful. When I came back from Johannesburg, I repainted the inside of the house, in all these sort of Egyptian sand colors and stuff like that, because it had been such a mind-blowing kind of experience. The whole thing, I was transformed into some kind of Egyptian scene, and when you look at what we see as Egyptian in today, the ancient Egyptian, I talk about the pyramid times, Anubis and all of those kinds of imaginings. Well, all of that was alive for me during the DMT experience. That was more my home. That was more real. And so when Charlotte said she'd had the same thing, and I know others have talked about the Egyptian thing, I've thought, okay, so people have had these experiences and then reverse engineered the Egyptian story, through ayahuasca and what have you. And perhaps then they took that and created the molds and the castings and the various things that Lee and others, fantastic researchers, Captain Kirk, they put these things up. Well, how about this? If we step back the human experience through what some claim, people like Martin Kenny and others claim that there are 4 previous iterations, bless you, there are 4 previous iterations of the human, that's maybe not the right term, but that this human suit that we're in now, this human experience we're having now, is the 5th incarnation of human evolution, if you like, or our evolution here. And our science would have us believe that this is the highest we've ever gotten. But of course, that this is the lowest we've ever gotten, the smallest we've ever gotten, with the exception perhaps of this last few hundred years. People were so badly starved and so on that arguably they were smaller people, a little bit smaller people, and we're a little bit taller than them thanks to genetic modification of the. But in fact, we're still tiny by comparison to the people of the last round who built the houses that we sometimes easily live in. The part of London, certainly. Like if I walk around Chelsea and the house we first rented when we were in Earl's Court, some of the stuff you would have seen me look at earlier, months ago in London, those buildings were built by people who were a little bit bigger than us, like 8 foot, 9 foot people. The ceilings are higher, the windows are bigger, the architecture's grander. But if you step back before that, you get to even bigger people, and we start to talk about the giants, people that are 15 or 20 foot tall. When we visited a town called San Gimignano, I probably totally murdered that Italian name, but an old 1,000-year-old, so they say, more than 1,000-year-old town in Italy, near Florence. Yeah, it's quite near Florence, eh?
Yeah, it's in Tuscany.
In Tuscany. There, when I went there in 2016, I wasn't quite as cute on the mud flood. I knew that we'd been lied to with the Shape of the Earth, but I wasn't allowing for giants in the way that they've got these doorways that are magnificent, And I would say, that's probably they wanted to pull like a horse and cart with it, laden with hay right up high. So they went to massive extent. These little people are building these humongous doors. No, those were bigger people, and they had different skills. Then, if you go, there's probably another step where people were even bigger still, into the, 40 meters perhaps, or 30 meters, much taller. The people who built things like the Acropolis. But getting to the pyramids, the people who built those were. This is my reasoning now, or my thinking now, is that the people that built those were perhaps the biggest people, or the biggest entities. But here's the thing, given the DMT connection and that kind of taking me back to knowing that I'm something much more powerful, but putting me in an Egyptian seen. And we know that the pyramids are found across the plain. So, ergo, these bigger entities, bigger beings were in fact, everywhere and making these structures. But what if this material experience that we're having now is not only the sort of Dhamma less able to, telecommunicate, but in the way that everything's heavier. Okay, so our bodies are heavier, and the materials around us are heavier. So if you step back through 5 iterations or 4 iterations, and you get back to the people who built the pyramids, then not only were their bodies not material in the way that we see ourselves now, but that the materials were all light. And by light, I mean glowing light, still raw vibration in the way that you see it on the DMT, without all the layering of materialism and reductionism that comes from that. So actually, thanks for bearing with me to get to this point in the conversation, but that when we built the pyramids, we were simply molding light, or we were using the materials, the various vibrationary frequencies that we now see as rock or stone, but we were doing that simply by carving bits of light. I suppose if you look at the game Minecraft, that's all they're doing in a virtual sense, is they're carving light, because that's all it is. And they're able to kind of lift light and move light in the way that we can imagine it being light, with no weight, no mass. So not only were we massive, but we were simply light back then. And as each step down, the diminution of the experience occurred, so things materialized into harder and harder structures. So now that we're all the way where we are, when we encounter pyramids, we encounter them as hard rock, not as light. When we encounter the giant trees, we encounter them as rock, not as the light trees that they might well have once been. So, because these are still frequencies, it's merely how we interpret the frequency. These are still vibrations. It's merely how we in this material realm are able to interpret them. And they appear to us now, these puny little humans, 6-footers that we've become. And I don't, even the 7 and 8-footers that I think are perhaps just a genetic modification of our little cells. They're not from. There might be descendants of those bigger people that are still among us. I wouldn't want to get into that debate so much, as this is like the step down, and that step down. This step down may well be the lowest, or perhaps someone was suggesting earlier on they want the third World War and the whole Zion thing and the third temple, and all of that might simply be what is required for this system to get itself so badly broke that the people who dwell here force themselves to seek a return to that higher state. The mission. That's when the shift happened.
So while you've been talking, I've been thinking.
Yeah.
And so part of evolution of self, or being on the head of the road, is to make yourself that light being again. Because we are light, we are energy, and how do you do that? And I think when you're looking outside of yourself for the answers, then you can't be light, because the answers out there are quite heavy. And don't get me wrong, I think you should be aware of of what's going on around you, but I think the answers are within, and I think you've got to find ways to become light again, and that has to be through living your life more virtuously. There has to be purging that toxic behavior. There has to be connecting back to nature. I know that when I feel heavy and dense, in fact, I had that experience the other day with Dave. We were in the blocked energy, and when I initially get there, I can actually feel, I can physically feel the blocked energy. And as we move through, and I'm able to relax and breathe and be around nature, and perhaps even get to ground, because obviously that's ultimately what you want to do when you're in nature, I can actually feel that energy shift. And perhaps that's when we're in this system, and that's why more and more it becomes a concrete jungle. We're less and less able to shift and feel light, because we're in all this density. And
but we've been born into the density,
and
so
I think other ways are being creative, and I'm not, being creative, finding something that fills you up with joy, laughter and those light feelings. They are what make you feel lighter. So it's all those things that we need to be working on, to kind of make us those light beings again.
Cool. Well, I had this powerful meditation yesterday that was, I'm not looking to make anything up. And I've always been that skeptical. I came at this from that skeptical atheist point of view. But this meditation was like very powerful in the sense that it kind of reminded me or reconnected me to the sense of how close to God, how close to whatever that top layer of us is. If we're 5 steps down or 4 steps down, whatever, then we are our journey is to return to that. I can't, we could get into debates about how we fell and how, who's responsible and so on, but all of that is outside. And as I started by saying, that it was rather curiously, well, maybe not synchronistic that the Guardian chose to use that line, your government wants you divided. So, whilst I'm all for people knowing the truth about what is going on here, when we stand in Speaker's Corner and shout at the other guy about the things that he does or doesn't believe, and who the bad guys are and so on, it should be as a part of the journey to rediscovering that, or ending the divide in yourself. The divide in yourself is the thing that stops you from becoming light again. And
sorry, I didn't finish.
Sorry, darling.
I didn't know, that's fine. I just wanted to add one thing, and I think that includes what we put into our body and how we treat our body.
Sure.
We become lighter when we are nourishing our body in the way that. And I'm not putting any judgment on how people do that, because I think we are individuals, and we have to find our own individual path, whether it be through our body or the way we seek to be reconnected to self. So you will find that, and that takes work. That it's not. This is not a. This is not a like. Oh well, I can just sit there and meditate and it'll all be okay. It is about taking the steps, but they should
Mm.
be in the light sort of way.
Mm. And do I think that the dairy farmer can find his way to this light? Yes, absolutely. He could still be a dairy farmer, and in my view, you know, because
You might not want to be a dairy farmer after a while.
no, he would want to be a conscious dairy farmer. If he still wanted to be in farming and producing food, I think that there is this expectation by certain religious mindsets that the being here needs to be um, all about abstinence, and whereas it should rather be about temperance. And you know gluttony is a real sin, and that will cause us problems. Perhaps it's really the problem is we just keep coming back around until we address the gluttony. But temperance, and even-handedness in the way that we do things and the way that we treat things and the way that we treat nature, we treat our body and so on. But I don't know that um, that this sort of banging, oh, you got to do this, you can't do that, and so on. That's not really that's not listening to yourself. That's having someone else shout their version of what the reality is for them. And I think that if things are done in love, as I said earlier on, the idea that there's death is a very human construct. There is a transmutation of energy. I saw the energy in the DMT experience, and there's a transmutation of that energy from one form to another. So you could cut the grass today, and that energy will sit in the compost heap and be transmuted back eventually to worm food, and earth again, and then nourish another round of plants. Now, hopefully, or grass, hopefully, in time, that energy, it shouldn't really matter to itself. It just wants to express itself in some way, and it's constantly doing that. Just, maybe a smelly dung heap at the moment, but, it will next time round become the head of corn that you might eat, or that a head of cattle might eat. And, if it's well treated, then that energy will serve you well. And so what you see happening in certain religious groups, for example, say Mormonism, or the who's that? Those Presbyterians we have here, the what do they call themselves? Those ones that went to your school.
The brethren.
The Brethren. They become so frightened of the consequences of a certain type of behavior that they sequester themselves in a quiet corner somewhere on the earth to try and prevent the toxification of certain things. And or they will say, you've got to abstain from anyone ever seeing your face. You've got to have a dish towel hung over your head because, someone sees you, that will be a bad thing. I mean,
that forces you out of accountability, doesn't it? It doesn't, because
yeah.
if we need to be accountable. We need to be, and something that I think Dave and I have experienced on this path is that actually when you are engaging in things that are light and nourishing and giving back to yourself and going inward, that actually your soul and your mind and your body evolve with that, and it unfolds like it should. So it's not about hiding from anything. Quite contrary, it is about exposing it all and living, in this truth. Which is why, seeing that there's a system is an important part of that.
Absolutely.
It's an important part of that. But actually, if you the answers are within. And you will find those answers.
Only if
But
you're
it's not
pushed to
about
it, eh?
hiding from them. It's not hiding your body or
Yeah.
whatever. It's about conscious awareness. And on that note, my beautiful little conscious being is waking up.
The little Alexander. Thanks, honey. Well, thanks for that contribution. And yeah, I didn't get a chance to look at the comments while Andrew was talking. I was looking at the sun, which is just peeking over the neighbor's house. It's a nice time of the day to get sun in the face, sun in the eyes, get the light. When it comes to people get very vexed about the food that they eat and the food that we're meant to eat. And I think it makes, absolute sense that there's food. It's obvious that there's foods in our system that are more or less harmful to the journey of enlightenment, enlightening yourself. There's the sun coming on my face. How about that? As I say that. So I'm certainly, checking myself and saying, is my approach to certain foods beneficial or otherwise? I think the way that I treat my plants, the way, if I was that dairy farmer, the way that I would treat my head of cattle, my livestock, would be in a loving way. Before my cannabis, I was quite emotional about my cannabis getting nicked last year by the police. And, I said a little goodbye to our plants, particularly one. I mean, one of them I'd spent an awful lot of time nurturing her. There's a video of that one somewhere on my channel, but I'd taken a video a few weeks before they were nicked. I had a relationship with that plant. Every day I would touch her. I would touch them all, but this one I would, put my hand around the base of the stem and greet her and thank her and stuff like that for her energy. And you'll see from the video, if you ever watch it, like the underside, the inner sort of core of the tree, I'd kept very clean and tidy because I was putting all the energy into the heads, into the buds. And so each day, as part of my medicine, I would eat a little bit of raw bud from the weaker buds, the lower buds, and typically I would thank the tree for the energy and the health. I knew one day that I would have to harvest the tree, and I would have, had I got to that day, thanked the tree before making the final cut through the stem. With this one, as an aside, I had actually intended to, because I'd created this beautiful sort of set of antlers shape with the tree splitter at the bottom node, and then created these beautiful. It was almost like a rib cage, two rib cages. If you looked up inside of the tree, and I was actually thinking of keeping the whole tree intact, root bowl and everything. Just washing the soil off, and turning her into like an art installation, a lamp, something like that. That was what I'd hoped to do with that tree. Such was my feelings towards that tree, So when the police simply came in and ripped her, and of course I'd tied down a lot of the branches, I'd opened her up with ties and so on, and so she was tied to the tub that she was growing in, and of course the police didn't care about any of that. They just ripped at her and pulled her arms out and stuff like that, and then and then cut the, with a, I don't know what they used, but the little 4 seconds of footage that my niece caught from the bathroom window was right at the end where they were just kicking at the root bowls. They wanted to absolutely make sure there was nothing that could regrow. I hadn't considered that, but that's obviously their standard process. Kicking up the root bowls, and I actually cried when I saw that because that was the first time I cried about it. So that was the time, because it was like, wow, look how they've treated those plants. And I'd put so much energy in. My little Alexander, he was whatever, coming up for 18 months, but he'd gotten used to coming out and tending the plants with me and pulling off the browner leaves and stuff. He was already a dab hand at that, actually. Yeah. And so it was something that I couldn't really ever get him to understand how they'd gone away. So, but he noticed that they were gone because we'd go into the garden every day and work on them. So when it comes to nurturing and loving and caring for the thing that you will then use for your nourishment, that's far more important than actually what, because it's all energy at the end of the day. I accept the point absolutely that there's lighter energy and heavier energy and darker energy, heavier. Now, we live in a world in which we are heavier beings. We are no longer the light beings. And I would offer to you that the giants of old, I'll go back a step before the last step, perhaps even a step before that. So I would say the layer 2, perhaps the layer 3 iterations of you and me were eating only fruit. I mean, we always talk about how these massive animals like the elephants and so on get away with just a vegetarian, vegetable diet. And so there is something sort of inverted about that. I hope the light isn't too bright, but I can't help it in a way. That actually, the nature of what we are is we are heavy, fallen beings. We are material beings, and that's the nature of this reality, like it or not. So obviously, when we were, well, not obviously, but I would assume, to take my analogy back a step, right to the Egyptian version of us, where things were simply light. And we could build pyramids by simply imagining things and pulling light into shape and so on, connecting it to the lights in the sky and all of that. Back then, we didn't eat. Perhaps we didn't have, we were light beings, and we consumed light, perhaps, but we didn't need to eat anything. But equally, in that higher state, we might not have been able to taste anything. We might not have been able to enjoy things in certain ways, and perhaps there were certain pleasures that we couldn't have. So we chose increasingly heavy options, and so we set outside of the light and became vegetable eaters or fruit eaters, and then maybe later on meat eaters too. And I'm not trying to say that this body now is of that higher being. I mean, it is of the being, but it isn't that. It isn't that light being. That's the truth, and the honest reality of this is that we live in this heavy world. One might say, oh, then you're meant to kind of get back to breatharianism, and if you become a breatharian, then you are the enlightened and the highest of. Well, I don't know that that's necessarily the path that we're on. Certainly not for me. I'm not drawn to that degree of abstinence, because that's like the kind of the no sex before marriage mindset, or the do not touch alcohol, it will kill you. I'm not recommending that people drink, but I am recommending that people experience it. Drink alcohol. I'm experiencing. That's part of the thing that we're here for, is to have these experiences. But to learn temperance, and even-mindedness with these things. So treat it well, and let it treat you well. I don't know if any of you guys follow John St. Julian. He set up that fantastic Feather's Tale children's refuge in Tanzania, right near where I think, and my friend Niven thinks that might be the primary tree of life, at Kilimanjaro or at Mount Meru. Actually, Niven, if you're listening to this, I think I've got to show you some real world images of trees lying on their side, and if you see how one of the main branches of the tree felled rots out, you will recognize what we see as Mount Meru in Tanzania, or Kenya. Tanzania, I think. Anyway, Mount Meru, it's easy to find. It's only less than 100 miles from Kilimanjaro herself. Shit. Did I lose my thread? What we felt, what we came from. Oh, God, sorry if I've lost this. But what we came from is what we seek to return to, I'm sure. But not... Oh, yes. John St. Julian, Feather's Tale. Yeah, well done. And I started watching that guy when he had a few hundred subs, maybe a few thousand. And now that he's got 150,000 subs or something. And thankfully been able to fund a whole lot of fantastic projects, right? But the dude is physically sick. And I saw Santos Bonacci doing something the other day, boasting about 50 days of fasting, but looking like shit. The guy's 5 years older than me, and he looks like my granddad. No offense, Santos, if you hear this, but it's like, you guys are not facing up to reality, man. This guy, John St. Julian, he admits it, a guy with ego, and that was his ego. He lived in Liverpool and lived up a flash car lifestyle and so on, but he's turned around, for 180, and put his life, he's done fantastic things. I really can't commend him enough. I think he's a little bit kind of caught up in certain parts of the religious dogma, but I'm not. This is not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about these people who insist on their veganism and then do not outlive people that are not vegans by any particular measure of impressiveness. And then when you see these folks who are struggling with their illness, oh, well, I just need to take a few more extra supplements, or nature doesn't. I don't buy that. I'm not buying into this idea that I accept that maybe once upon a time the fruit was bigger and more full of light, and therefore more life-giving. But but I also at the same time then accept that my body was a different kind of body, and it responded in different ways to the nature of things around it, from a light being to a semi-light being who could eat light food, to a heavy being, fallen being, reliant on heavier food in order to get by. Santos, used this schoolboy analogy of, oh, you buy a petrol car, you think you can put diesel in it. That is so simplistic a view of how humanity is. I've listened to Santos for like 4 years and turned him off at times because it's like this guy isn't willing to kind of see past what he's already, he's taken from one of the teachers that he's learned from. I hope I'm not I'm not falling prey to the same thing. But when it comes to, you look at John St. Julian, the dude's got like a PICC line now up his arm to his heart, delivering man-made chemicals. This is a guy who's, it's all nature, it's all about nature. But the moment his health failed like that, it's like, he's back to the medicine cabinet from the doctors, but won't touch meat. Won't touch meat. And it's like, we are meat. You know what I mean? So, we are petrol, Santos. So we need petrol. We are meat, so we need. If we were light beings, then we could just suck on that light and go, right, I'm healthy again, right? But we're not. We're reduced from that. Treat your animals and your plants with love, and eat what you do with love. But don't forget what you are here. This is not. This is just another. I'll call it a new age deception. I'll call it a new age deception because we took animal husbandry. We've brought animal husbandry down the generations. It has been with us. Everybody was a goat herder back in the day. What were those goats for? What were the goats for? Just for, the odd ceremony once a year or something? I don't think so. And what happens if you have a herd of goats and like it's 100 goats and every year 3 die from old age? Just throw them in a hole in the ground? Well, okay, that energy is being returned in one way, but what if your body is made up of light, semi-light, and heavy or dark, and you need to receive the spectrum? Not only there's people who are vegetarians and or vegans, who never go into the sun, and they are pale and flaccid, So you need the light too. You need the light. But plants take on that energy and they turn it into, they sort of concentrate that energy and then we eat it. And then animals take that energy too and they eat it and they concentrate that light down much more densely, until it gets to a darker place or a darker kind of thing. But it's energy nonetheless, and it's love energy or frightful energy depending on the belief system that you have. I am willing to accept that perhaps, as much as I love or have loved pork and shellfish, that perhaps these are to stay off the menu for reasons to do with. That's another conversation for another day. Not a religious, but just that I'll say it because I've said it. Because whatever's above us and whatever's below us may be the pigs and the bottom crawlers, may be the spawn of whatever's above and whatever's below. You know the expression, pigs may fly? Well, what if, there are these, but in the water above, that there are these other pig-like beings? I mean, this is obviously, this is belief. This is belief. But I was thinking, and if in the lower seas, there's below the seas, the giant, there's creatures that would frighten the heck out of us. And if they could smell that you've been eating their offspring, their tiny offspring, then they might have a go at you. But ultimately, we are the system. We are of the system. We are the system, and we are. We should receive from the system in a loving, temperate way. And so when you see people that are kind of their health is really being affected by the things that they do, whether that because they're eating so much meat, their body's clogging up and riddled with cancers. And I know people who have foreshortened their lifetime here because of that kind of gluttony. But it's the others who also, Alexander's coming downstairs. It's the others who also, wow, that's bright. I hope that doesn't. Hello, little boy. Daddy's sitting in the sun so bright I can't even see you but a silhouette. But what do I call it? It's like is it an intellectual kind of deception? That people have gone beyond this idea of having a balanced sort of food to going, it's all got to be from the light spectrum only and nothing from the heavy and nothing from the dark, for whatever the reasons. So hey, I guess I had that to get off my chest, and I wanted to share that with you and share those thoughts because these are some of the things that have been appearing to me or appealing to me that I've come across on the Yellow Brick Road. So yeah, I'll keep it short. I mean, I haven't actually been reading the comments for a while, so I'm sorry if there was a question you had for me. Perhaps you could just highlight my name, so that I pick it out. It's not that there's so many. It's just that I'm not wearing the glasses. I don't even know where they are. I haven't worn them for. You do?
Yeah.
I could look at them, I suppose. The comments. Didn't want to make this too long. There is only so many hours of the day, and we've all got so much to learn and to grow. Hopefully, this is of value to you. And I'm not in the business of wanting to have really any more debates with the religious believers of particular sets of dogma, from Christianity to veganism. Actually, to me, that they're all like, oh, you have to do this and you must do that. No, if you go back to the 4 cardinal virtues, you look at the 4 cardinal virtues and show me where it says you have to follow this set of dogma or that set of dogma. It doesn't. It's about following your heart, and in my heart I know that I need to take certain things. I need to keep clear of certain things and certain ideologies, poisonous ideologies, which reminds me of Tommy Robinson. Did any of you, somebody sent Shizzle, thank you if you're hearing this, but a dude I know from a brother, I should say, I know from the Speaker's Corner. For what it's worth, he's carrying a black skin here. But he sent me a video of Tommy Robinson because he knows my views on Tommy and what he's about. He sent me a video showing how a Muslim, obviously Muslim dude, threw a milkshake on him. And for me, that's exactly what Tommy wants. They really want to kind of stoke feelings of antipathy or hatred towards people of different groups, different tribes, ethnic.
Remember not to steer away from, actually this is all part of the system. So you've got to not be too trapped in what this one is trying to stoke and what that one is trying to stoke. It's there meant for various people, including you. There's obviously...
I was going to get to that, darling. Thanks for harpooning my live stream. There are certain drawbacks to having a conversation as opposed to a live stream. You did it. Well done, little boy. You climbed up on the chair. Sure. Right, honey. Yeah, I have lost my thread.
Tommy Robinson. I'm not
Oh
sure.
yeah, Tommy Robinson wants that because they want people to notice. In fact, I typed something into the search engine for Alexander to watch. It was going to be toy something, but I got TO and Tommy Robinson came up. I typed in TO, and we've never used it. Was through my older son's PS4 that we can get YouTube. So I've never typed in Tommy Robinson on that before, but TO brings up Tommy Robinson. So if they aren't trying to push this Jewish agenda, this white Zionist agenda, the anti through that the anti-Muslim or anti-Christian, depending on your perspective, agenda. It has to be said that this is absolutely going on and very, very powerful.
Yeah.
I also see this idea that someone's version of history is a preferred version of history, particularly this one of the slaves, the 400 years, and the Israel. I think he's going to fall for the Israel thing. I see this as just another powerful tool of division outside of yourself. Because if you, in your heart, think that you are different from everybody else, then you've been divided, separate from everybody else through their one verse city or university system or other forms of indoctrination. I'm sorry to say it, but if you think that that we are separate in any way, then you have not yet remembered who and what you are. I can't say it, more kind of clearly than that. And I don't mean it as a judgment, just as a realization myself. I mean, one of the people who along this journey at some point, gave me an awful lot of insight and wisdom that I'd not previously had, and was Dave Murphy. And then he comes out as, oh well, actually I'm a Hebrew Israelite. Maybe he didn't just come out with it, but the point is, that's what I realized that he would claim to be. And because I hadn't been paying attention to all these little subgroups of religious dogma, but this is another form of historic and religious dogma for me that is just hurtful to the individual and the whole. Because I know this because of the way that one of these acolytes of this cult of belief attacked me in Speaker's Corner, where I'm holding Alexander in front of me, and this bloke is calling me a white devil. And that speaks volumes as to the nature of what people are thinking, because he was really on a bit of a rant, Bible in hand, as if my memory serves me. Well turned out guy, not lost his mind, well turned out, and very smart in what he knew. But I am a white devil according to those people, and therefore they've fallen into the trap of this white dude created your history, and this white dude is responsible for all your troubles. Or white dudes like me. I mean, it's hard to deny that when you look around politics in the West, then it's white. But of course, politics in Africa is black at the face. And we know that the politics in China, it's Chinese. We know that the politics is just a plank, an arm, or a leg of the beast, of the system. I shouldn't even call it a beast, because perhaps it's here to push you to find the four heavenly virtues. Sorry, the cardinal virtues. There's 7 heavenly virtues, and they're all important, but there are the cardinal ones. And I think if we strive towards those cardinal virtues, then we will strive to be reunited as one, living in love, and return eventually to those light beings who don't need the things that are heavy here. But I think we're meant to enjoy them. It's like those guys who go, don't have any sex, or don't enjoy yourself. My grandparents' generation were very much that. The joke was my grandparents had 6 children and intercourse just as many times. And I think that's a part of that kind of over egging the temperance thing, overdoing it. We it's about having that balance, isn't it? And realizing that nothing ultimately matters because we find our way back. So why don't we take our foot off our own neck and allow ourselves to enjoy this time here, but do it in the wisdom and the knowledge and the insight of what we are. And we can know so much about what we are simply by knowing how this game has been designed to rob us of that truth so completely. But it would have to be a great game. It would have to be better than some board game that you can buy in the shop. It has to be that, because without it, we don't go, we don't grow, we don't create the emotion, to create the motion to get us back, working back towards that light being, but at the same time being realistic about who and what we are, not taking a Catholic view of sin and, oh, what a bad thing you are, and so on, and come and say sorry to the Father here, because that's really not the right. We are the Father, we are the Mother.
We have to be accountable, don't we?
And we'll never be fully accountable until we take cognizance of that truth. There was something else I wanted to close this out with, but it seems to have escaped my mind. Perhaps if I just quickly look at the old Chatteroony. My love, is there any chance we could get another heavy coffee? It's not even organic. Budget considerations.
I put a coffee on.
You are good.
Well, I'd inspire people, and I'm inspiring myself by saying this. Go and find some to make you feel light.
Gee, now here's my little boy. That'll make you feel light.
System.
Hey, Zizi. Morning. You are so cute.
Someone said the other day, didn't they? They said he's a ray of sunshine.
A ray of sunshine, well, indeed. You want to see some choo-choo? We've been putting some steam trains on the TV. That's how it starts. I mean, the reality is, my friends, he needs to experience this world and make the choices for himself. I can't make the choices for him.
Expose him to some really good choices.
Yeah. But again, it's like if you put them in a convent and say, all right, you're never going to see anything, then they'll never. Yeah, we live in a world with porn, for example. So at some point when he's much older, he might stray onto those kind of territories, but hopefully to only go and experience it and learn from it and walk away